Hello, welcome back. You're watching Breakfast with Naga Munchetty and Charlie Stayt.
Good morning to you. It's coming up to 8:30. Now, an investigation by BBC News has found that it would take the NHS 8 years to see all adult patients currently waiting for an ADHD assessment across the UK.
Comes figures suggest nearly 200,000 individuals are awaiting a diagnosis for the condition, as our health correspondent Catherine Burns reports.
You might think ADHD is just when you struggle to concentrate. These people would disagree.
It feels like ADHD has been bad at all the things that people find simple.
Undiagnosed, you walk around with a lot of shame.
Self-medicating with drink and drugs was how I was managing it, and I
can't function. I don't like people calling ADHD a superpower. It's certainly not a superpower for me.
People with ADHD can struggle with focus, hyperactivity and impulse control.
Oh, so do you also have constant multiple...
As society and social media has become more open about ADHD, more people are asking to be assessed to see if they have it. But no one knows how many. There's no official data. So we asked trusts and health boards across the UK about their adult ADHD services and can now reveal the pressure they're under. So here's what we know. There are at least 195,000 adults waiting for NHS ADHD assessments. Demand has quadrupled over 5 years, and now the national backlog for those assessments is more than 8 years. Here's a city that is struggling. Sheffield Health and Social Care NHS Foundation Trust told us it has 6,737 people on its waiting list. So we got together a group who all asked for help here.
last year they did 3 assessments.
No. It makes me sad that there's that many people, even just in Sheffield, just struggling without a diagnosis.
If they continued working at this pace, it would take more than 2,000 years to see everyone who's already waiting.
Speechless, devastating. That's shocking. Shocking.
Of course, no one is going to wait 2,000 years, but it shows the service here just isn't working.
At no point would we have 6,700 people with untreated broken legs sitting at home, not being able to go to work and going, that's fine.
The NHS has only got a limited pot of money. There's cancer, there's emergency care, there's life or death situations. What would you say to that?
This is a life or death situation. I personally tried to take my own life twice before I got my diagnosis because of the stress and trauma of having to navigate a world that I didn't understand.
Sheffield Health and Social Care declined to give us an interview, but told us it has focused on treating people who've already been diagnosed instead of doing new assessments. It gave us this statement: "We are sorry that we've not been providing a good enough service to people seeking help for ADHD," and continued, "We are working closely with our Integrated Care Board to ensure that the services we provide are able to meet the required need and demand." Sheffield is an extreme example, but across the UK, our data shows a clear picture, a system that is no longer fit for purpose. Northern Ireland doesn't officially commission any adult ADHD services, but Belfast Health and Social Care Trust does assessments anyway. And we know that at least 4 trusts in England have closed or partly closed their waiting lists.
I have never seen anything like the demand that I've seen for ADHD services. It's the speed of the growth and the size of the growth.
Health authorities across the UK say they're trying to improve the service.
We've seen a huge upswing in people seeking help with...
NHS England told us patients are waiting too long for an ADHD diagnosis, and so it's launched a task force to help manage the rising number of referrals. Back in Sheffield, Louise is still on a waiting list. Katie paid for a private diagnosis. Nellie and Rob found another option: right to choose. It's a legal right in England which lets you get a private diagnosis paid for by the NHS. What difference has being assessed made to you?
It has just validated my whole entire life and existence on this planet. Like, I'm kinder to myself now.
I'm not beating myself up going, why am I doing this? I can say, well, this is just who I am.
The person that I am post-diagnosis is unrecognisable from the person that I was before. It's rounded out who I am as a person.
Catherine Burns, BBC News.
Well, three people who know this story so well with us now. Matthew Menzies, who has been diagnosed with ADHD. Morning to you, Matthew. Rachel Fanner, who's waiting for a diagnosis. And Thea Stein from Nuffield Trust is with us as well. Do you know, because people are interested in ADHD and how it affects you, I was just curious about the environment you were in this morning in a TV studio. Rachel, how is this for you? Is it challenging?
It's quite overwhelming because one of my previous therapists said that neurodivergent people take in 5 times as much information as neurotypical people. So while someone else might be just listening to what you were saying, I can hear the hubbub of the studio behind when there were conversations happening between Naga and Thea behind you, and the interview for the video a moment ago, and the bubble on the logos behind you, the water moving, and everyone else's brain just filters that out. Well, neurotypical brains officially filter that out. I don't think typical is quite as typical as, but...
And Matthew, for you, are there similarities there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rachel put it perfectly. For me, my sensitivities are auditory, so this is actually quite nice and kind of calm, settled environment, whereas put me in a bar or a cafe and ask me to have a conversation, and like all I can hear is people's cups moving and spoons on cups and other people's conversations. It's almost impossible to concentrate on the
Do you find you can hear the
communication.
person behind you more than the person in front of you?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, it's so important and interesting hearing you say that, because it comes right to the point here, Rachel. You cannot get a diagnosis at the moment for your condition.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So part of this is the issue of moving house. So having lots of addresses, the NHS can't keep up with where you are, and that slows things down. Every single time there's waits for them to update their systems. But when I moved to Oxfordshire from Hampshire, I had been on the waiting list in Hampshire for about a year, and then I moved to Oxfordshire and I'd said, what happens with my referrals? And they said, we're not actually sure because there isn't a waiting list here. Can you stay on your one in Hampshire? I contacted my previous GP and they said, we don't actually know what the process is for doing this.
So you are caught between a rock and a hard place. You don't know where to go, and you don't have a diagnosis.
Yeah. I don't have a diagnosis. I do have a diagnosis of autism, and there is also the complicating factor that lots of people are officially recognised to have both eventually, but initially are told, oh, you've already got ADHD, you can't have autism, or you've already got autism, you can't have ADHD, when there's a massive overlap in the Venn diagram of both conditions.
Absolutely. Matthew, you have had a diagnosis.
I have, yes. Yeah.
What difference to your life has that made?
I mean, my diagnosis was a complicated process, but once I was eventually on the right medication and kind of having that like holistic support of coaching and educating myself alongside that, it's been the difference between staying in employment, between staying in relationships and maintaining friendships. It's life-changing. It's my pre-diagnosis kind of life was just full of real hard mental health struggles, a lot of mental health crisis. And post-diagnosis, I've been able to kind of like reveal myself, unmask and kind of like reveal the layers of that where I was hiding myself previously, and discover that I'm not just a box of broken kind of tools, that within me I've got lots of strengths, and it was just about creating the right environment for myself to unveil them.
You know, Thea, it's interesting when you hear the word diagnosis. Once upon a time, you would think, oh, they've been diagnosed with something, it's terrible. But the relief from getting a diagnosis, it's not a label, it's a step forward, isn't it? As you described, to having holistic care, to being helped to unlock the broken tools, as you said, you know, you were being seen. Yet we're now looking at, what, 8 years? If the system stays the same, what will change that?
There's a lot of work at the moment from NHS England to look at this and to try and change it. One of the big challenges has been the scale of growth over really a relatively short period of time. So between 2019 and 2023, you've had a 53% rise in people diagnosed ADHD. Now, as your commentators found out, there's actually no official waiting list for ADHD. When we did the work at the Nuffield, we tried to do exactly what Kath Burns tried to do, to find out how many people are on a waiting list. They're not officially collected. So what we did, we looked at prescribing and we looked at prescriptions to see if we could get a sort of a lens to look at this. And what we found was this massive rise in prescribing over time.
And
that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Why such an increase? Just because it's being recognised more, or
yeah,
it's being, you know, or various symptoms, characteristics being put into the ADHD category?
No, not the latter. It very much seems to be awareness. And awareness raising is a good thing. Sometimes people talk about, oh, people are coming forward and they don't really need to come forward, and how ill are they really? But we have a lot of awareness raising. We've a lot of understanding. We've got many more celebrities who've come out in public and talked openly, and people coming on a programme like this and talking openly, and people have more access to information. So they're coming forward as adults and saying, I wonder if this diagnosis could be an explanation for what's going on in my life.
Rachel, it must be so frustrating, and that's an understatement for you, that I mean, you're sitting next to a man who has gone through the process and has described brilliantly, Matthew, the change it's made. It must be so frustrating for you.
So one of my relatives recently put it that it's failed potential, because I had lots of issues at school. I think lots of neurodivergent people do, but I can't say knuckled down because I fell out of school, but I went different ways. I found alternative ways of doing things, but I eventually went to uni. I found a niche in the neurodiversity sector where I was quite happy, but at the same time, I figured this out on the 23rd, but let's say approximately half of the month, I am asleep all afternoon because my brain has just run out of energy to do things with. There's just no oomph left, which I think is one of the things that the medication can make a difference for people on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think medication can give you the structure and the routine to do the things that are good for you and recognise when you're approaching that burnout. And it allowed you then to kind of like manage yourself better, because like you've been through coaching yourself, you were saying earlier, but without that medication to be able to maintain that routine and structure, you're on a kind of slippery slope to that energy loss constantly, and burnout can be really, really severe.
So I'm thinking that, I mean, Rachel, who is so eloquent here in explaining these things so we all understand more, it's such a waste. I mean, that's the obvious thing that comes up. There's a waste of, you know, a talent and a skill set, and someone who could be so much more productive in society for no good reason.
But also, Rachel's explained it to us. Like, we've been sitting here for 8 minutes or so, right? So we know that there is an issue.
Yeah.
What?
So what you've got at the moment...
Who's waiting to say, yes, Rachel, you're right. You know, these are the issues you have to cope with.
At the moment, diagnosis is done by professional teams, by psychiatrists, psychologists, people who have advanced nurse practitioners who've been working together to listen to everything that Rachel's saying and saying, yes, this is the diagnosis. The way I put it is the size of the NHS capacity to do that work with those specialists is a bit like a pint glass. And for a period of time, that pint glass was enough for a pint of liquid. What you're now trying to do is put 4 pints of liquid into that pint glass. So the pint glass is working really, really hard, but it isn't big enough. It cannot do the work at the speed. And so the challenge the NHS has got at the moment is, and I do think it's a point in time, because we've got lots of adults who are now seeking a diagnosis that actually would have been better made when they were a child. And so we're going to see Rachel nodding. But we've got this group of adults now, and the NHS has to find a way of helping, supporting and diagnosing. My huge hope is that we go through that period of time, and in the future we would be able to put our resources and help into ensuring all children and young people get the resource at the time that they need it, rather than waiting until they're adults. But it is a massive problem at the moment.
Thea, thank you so much. Matt, did you want to say something?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I quickly wanted to say something about being diagnosed as a child. I wasn't diagnosed autistic until I was 16. I'd already fallen out of the school system. Everything had gone wrong because there was no support in place. No one knew anything about what was going on or why. And that was burnout in its own way because there was no accommodation. Nothing was being done to support me. But I have friends who were diagnosed when they were 4. And going back through my medical records, I had a lisp when I was little, and I had speech therapy for it, and we found on a document when I was about 5 or 6 years old, Asperger's ? from the speech therapist. So someone had noticed that something was not quite right, but something was different, and nothing. It was never followed up.
As you said, it's a system where 4 pints of liquid aren't fitting into the pint glass at the moment.
I really hope, Rachel, you get the diagnosis you need and should be getting. Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been really interesting talking about it
as well.
Thank you.